Hey, it's such an honor to be here. I got to be at Jubilee a couple years ago, and it's really great to be back. There's so many of you. I live in Florida. It's warmer in Florida. I put on all my clothes this morning thinking I'd have to walk here, and then realized I didn't have to go outside to get here, so that was really woo for that. So you guys just watched the trailer for our movie. The movie actually comes out March 3rd, and we're so excited that some of you are going to get the chance to see it tonight. And that's a true story. That's a story that I had the privilege of living back in 2006. And I think what I'm excited about with that movie, and maybe what's unique about the moments I get handed a microphone and get a few minutes on a stage, is I think when somebody takes the stage, oftentimes it's assumed that this person, he or she, they have some answers that they've become known for. And I've been doing this work for the last 9 years. It started by accident. It happened by accident. And there's a lot of answers when it comes to mental health, when it comes to addiction, self-injury, suicide. There's things that we've come to learn. There's things that we've come to believe. But I think what's unique about maybe this moment and this movie and the work that we do as an organization is that so much of it is maybe less about the answers and more about the questions. And what I mean by that, to unpack that a little bit, is I think when it comes to the pain in our lives, when it comes to the evidence of this fall that you keep hearing about this morning, I think a lot of us, we're not looking for someone to hand us the perfect book or make the perfect speech or tell us that, you know, there's 3 ways that we don't ever have to be sad again. I think more realistically, what we have a shot at and what we deserve, and maybe the way that God has orchestrated this life and intends it to be, is that we would not be alone in our questions. That there's other people who would show up in our story and through their words, and maybe even more so through their presence and through their friendship and their actions, they would demonstrate to us that we are not alone in the places that hurt. That when it comes to the biggest questions in our life, when it comes to the biggest questions that hang around the story of your family or your history, maybe it's things from years ago, maybe it's something from last week, that we don't have to be, that we were not intended to be alone in those places. And so I think my hope in this movie going out and people around the world being able to see it, my hope in everything we do now as an organization, is not only that people would realize they're not alone in their questions, but that people would feel like, hey, maybe I don't have to fake it. Maybe as a person who's experiencing pain, who's experiencing sorrow, things like depression, addiction, thoughts of suicide, maybe you've lost someone to suicide, that you don't have to fake it. I grew up in church, I grew up a Christian, and for some reason I thought that meant I was supposed to always have this joy, that I was kind of supposed to have it all together, and being a Christian meant I was blessed, and so naturally I was happy, and I kind of thought somehow, I don't know where I got this, but that I was supposed to fake it. When I saw the pastor on the stage, he seemed to have it all together. When you asked people how they were doing, they seemed to have it all together, and yet I didn't always feel that way, and I didn't know if there was a place for my pain, if there was a place for my honesty. There was a book that changed a lot of things for me. I'm guessing a bunch of you have read it, a book called Blue Like Jazz by Donald Miller. No one has read it. And I think that was the first book that kind of gave me permission to be honest, that said maybe as a Christian there was a place for my questions, that maybe as a Christian it was okay to be honest, it was okay to be a real person at the same time, and to admit the things you weren't sure about, to admit the things you had questions about, or the things that hurt. So this grew out of an experience that I had. I was working as a sales rep for a clothing brand called Hurley at the time. And growing up, that was kind of my dream job. And I ended up getting hired at 22 to be in charge of Hurley sales in the state of Florida. And then I met this girl, Renee. And she was denied entry into a treatment center. And my friends and I spent the next 5 days with her. And I asked her if it might be okay to tell part of her story. And I sat down, I wrote a couple pages, and I gave it this curious title. It was this phrase, "to write love on her arms." The night I met her, a few days before I wrote that story, shortly after meeting her, she went back upstairs to a group of people she had been partying with, she had been using drugs with, and they stayed up all night. Finally, around sunrise, she was the last one awake, and she ended up taking a razor blade off the kitchen counter. And with that blade across her left forearm, she wrote the word "fuck up." And I tell this story a lot. I've told it in all different kinds of places. My guess is I'm the only speaker that will say that word this weekend. It's okay to laugh. I've said that in places where I wasn't supposed to, where maybe you're not allowed to. And the reason I go there this morning, the reason it shows up in the story that I wrote a few years back, is because if you had the chance to meet my friend Renee and to talk to her, not just about her life, but about that night and that moment and that word, and if you could say, hey, how could you do that? Why did you do that? I don't think you would have a conversation that has anything to do with profanity. I think instead you would have a conversation that has a lot to do with identity. And I think you would hear her say that when it came to her 19 years on this planet, there wasn't much to be proud of. And I think that word summed up the degree of failure, the amount of regret, the amount of pain that she was living with. I ended up spending that time. She re-entered treatment. I got to write this story. And the whole thing was really about a few of us trying to meet our friend in her questions. We didn't have a lot of answers, but we wanted to keep her safe. We wanted to try to make her laugh. We wanted to believe the possibility that she deserved the chance to start over, that in so many ways she deserved the chance to begin again. This was a girl who grew up in church as well. She was a Christian, so it wasn't about this come to Jesus conversation that needed to happen. But I think what she was asking was, hey, these words like healing, these words like redemption, forgiveness, sobriety, are these words real? Like, can I have them? Can I hold on to them? And so those were the sort of questions I think that she was living with. My friend John Foreman plays in a band called Switchfoot. The San Diego people are over there. John was the first human being to put one of these t-shirts on. We initially made these shirts just to sell them in Orlando to try to pay for Renee's treatment. And John, who's not just a friend, but one of my heroes, he was the first person to put one of these t-shirts on at a Switchfoot show in South Florida. And essentially this story that I wrote and these t-shirts kind of took on a life of their own. And to some degree started to make their way around the world, and messages started to come in from people in Australia, from people in England, from people in places where they don't even primarily speak English. People started to share their questions. They started to share parts of their story. They wrote in on behalf of loved ones. Maybe it was someone they had lost. Maybe it was someone that they wanted to help. For a lot of people, this common thread that I began to see was people saying, this is part of my story that nobody knows. This is a question I've never asked. This is something I've never told anyone. And these questions just began to come to the surface, and we found ourselves participating and maybe even leading a conversation about some things that so many of us can relate to, and yet these things tend to be issues that go unspoken. They tend to live in silence. Often they're born in silence. It's a secret. It's something we're ashamed of, and we do our best to hide it. I don't have a lot of time this morning. I have a bunch of time this afternoon, get to do a breakout at 4 o'clock. But there's a couple things that I've really learned and come to believe over the last 9 years of doing this work, of participating in this conversation. Get to spend a lot of time on college campuses. We get to bring this conversation to college campuses. We've come to believe two things. First off, we've learned about, hey, what does this conversation look like in America? We've learned that untreated depression is the leading cause of suicide. That for us in this room today, suicide is the third leading cause of death. Learned that 2 out of 3 people who struggle with depression, they don't get help for it. And so if you sit with that for a second, that says the majority of people who live in this place, they essentially live alone. And I think it points to the stigma, it points to the confusion, it points to the shame that so many people, when it comes to their pain, they live lives of isolation. It would be difficult, it would be depressing if this talk, if this conversation stopped there. The good news is I get to stand up here on behalf of people whose lives suggest it's possible to start over. I've come to believe that God gives us a lot of tools in this life. Not only does he give us people who are wise, people who have devoted careers to being a part of this solution, he gives us medicine, gives us the gift of friendship. We've come to believe so much in professional help. I get to meet people who are sitting across from a counselor for the first time, beginning maybe to talk about things that they've never talked about or they haven't talked about in years, feeling a sense of healing, feeling a sense of progress. Get to meet someone who came to a place and said, my life is out of control. Things need to change. I want to get sober. I cannot do that by myself. And so we get to meet people who have stepped into treatment. Maybe we meet them 3 months down the road and they say, it hasn't been easy. It's not going to be easy. I'm going to need other people. We meet people who, for them, self-injury, using pain as a way to cope with pain became normal for them. We get to meet some of these same folks who are now sitting with a therapist and beginning to unpack that, beginning to try to understand that behavior and beginning to believe that there's got to be a better way, that maybe they deserve better. There's other ways to cope. There's other ways to live. They can learn those ways. We hear from people who have chosen to stay alive. They came to a desperate moment. Maybe it was the middle of the night. They called a crisis hotline or a suicide hotline. And not only did they make that decision on the phone, but they've had to make it every day since, where they say, I want to live, I want to keep going, and I'm going to need to do that in the context of relationships with other people. That other one, the other point is community. It's this belief that God has made you and I, he has created you and I in a way where we are wired to be known and loved by other people. And I don't think it's indicated by the number of Facebook friends, the number of followers. It would be a lot easier if that's how it worked, if that's what it meant to be known. But I don't know about you, but I can do a pretty good job of kind of piecing together a life that looks happy, that maybe looks impressive. I can find a couple photos throughout the week that look like a lot of fun. But I wonder, who knows you beyond the status updates, and who knows you beyond the fun phrases and the pictures that you share? Who knows you in the stuff that you don't know what to do with? Who meets you in your pain, in your questions, in the things you wish were different, in the things that you don't even know how to talk about? My friend Byron, he's one of my favorite people, a really dear friend. He says that friendship might be the greatest miracle that happens on this planet. And that's a bold idea. That's a big suggestion. There's certainly some incredible miracles that we experience in this life. And I think what he was saying was, man, how great is it that we don't have to do this thing alone? And Christina touched on it earlier. I got to have a moment with her backstage and just told her, I love this idea that essentially we are called to something that is impossible. Because of the broken state of this world, because of our own brokenness and pain, we're invited into something that we can't get all the way there. We're gonna mess it up because of our pride, because of our sin, because of our ego, because of the stuff that hurts. But we are called, we are invited not only to be in a relationship with God, but here to know each other, to be known by probably not 200 people, probably not 1,000 people, but I wonder if there's a couple people who you feel like are with you on this journey, and you don't have to fake it with them, and you have the privilege of meeting them in their questions, of being a character in their story, and they have the privilege of meeting you in those places. And I want to close just with the idea of stories. You know, certainly it's something that we've thought a lot about, this word, this idea of stories, and the way they speak to us, the way they move us. Had this once-in-a-lifetime thing happen where a story that I got to live has been made into a movie, and who would have thought? They got this guy that my sister used to have a crush on to play her brother. That's super awkward. It took you guys a second. We're fascinated by stories. And I want to end with a little bit of a disclaimer, which is that I'm not up here to try to impress you with us having a movie or impress you with the story of an organization that started by accident. Not to impress you with the story of my friend Renee or my own story. The great privilege of being in this amazing room with so many people, the goal for me is to sort of press pause and redirect the lights and just say, hey, what if you are living a story that matters just as much as everyone that's been on this stage, as much as anyone you've seen in a movie? What if you are living a story that is unique, that is sacred, that is priceless? What if no one else can play your part? I have a friend named Sierra DeMolder. She's a poet, a spoken word poet. She has this beautiful poem that just suggests this idea that your voice is someone's favorite voice and your face is someone's favorite face. And I hope those things feel true. I hope you can picture those other people that are in that equation, those other relationships. Come to believe that you are living a story that's unique and sacred and priceless, and you probably have parts of that story that you don't like. I might have parts of our story that we actually hate. If we're honest, maybe that's true. There's parts that we feel haunted by, there's moments that we feel stuck in, there's things that we wish we could remove from our story. And somewhere inside the same story, there are things that make you smile. There are experiences you've had, conversations, it was a trip you got to take, relationships that you've gotten to participate in. Your favorite book, your favorite film, your favorite song, the best concert you ever went to, the way it spoke to you. The way maybe God showed up somewhere in there and reminded you that you are alive. What I want to suggest is that all the things inside that story, the hardest parts, the dreams you have for the future, we're in a room full of people who are young. The belief, the hope is that you are early in your story. There's still a lot of time to be surprised. There's still a lot of time to get to a place you dream about. Maybe it's a career, maybe it's having a family. My belief is that it matters. And my hope is that you don't take my word for it, don't take the guest speaker's word for it, but that as you walk out of here, you get to walk out of here with other people who remind you how sacred your life is, that your story is worth fighting for, that if you ever get to a place of thinking about giving up on that story, that these folks would step in and remind you that they're going to fight for it as well, that it matters to them, that they're a character inside that same thing. And I think this is the way it's supposed to go. And I'm not suggesting that any of it's easy, but I have come to believe that it's worth it. So whatever hurts, it's okay to say that out loud. It's okay to share that burden with somebody else. It's okay to ask somebody a difficult question. If you need help, it's okay to ask for help. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. It suggests to me that we are loved by a God who cares about our pain. And with that, I think we are invited to be honest about it And what an amazing gift that we don't have to be alone in this life, that he gives us other people. Thank you, guys.